What happens when the person you betrayed finally fights back, not with anger, but with evidence? The day the legal documents arrived, I realized too late that my "it's complicated" excuse wasn't just ruining my marriage. It was about to cost me everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The evening light filtered through our suburban kitchen windows as I stirred my tea, trying to appear casual. Eli sat across from me at our dining table, his laptop open, but his attention clearly elsewhere. Our 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, was upstairs, supposedly doing homework, but I could hear her playing with her dolls instead. "You've been working late a lot recently," Eli said, his voice carefully neutral. He had that methodical way of speaking that came from years in IT consulting. Everything measured, everything deliberate. I kept my eyes on my cup. The office has been crazy busy. You know how it gets with quarterly reports. Right. He closed his laptop with a soft click. "It's just that when I called yesterday around 5, your coworker said you'd already left." My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to look up with what I hoped was an expression of mild annoyance. "Which coworker?" Because Janet always leaves early on Tuesdays, so she wouldn't know where I was. "It was Mike from accounting." Damn, Mike worked late most days. "Well, I was probably in the bathroom or getting coffee. You know how these office guys are. They never pay attention to where anyone actually is." Eli nodded slowly, but something in his expression told me he wasn't entirely convinced. "I'm not trying to control you, Calantha. I just worry when things don't add up." "Things don't add up?" I let a note of indignation creep into my voice. "Eli, I'm working my ass off to help support this family, and you're sitting here acting like I'm doing something wrong. Maybe if you showed a little more appreciation instead of suspicion, I wouldn't need to stay late just to avoid coming home to an interrogation." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they had the desired effect. Eli's face fell slightly, and he ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of backing down from conflict. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. I shouldn't have questioned you like that. I know you're working hard." The guilt should have hit me then, seeing him apologize for something that wasn't even his fault. But instead, I felt a familiar surge of justification. This was exactly the problem with our marriage. Eli was too passive, too willing to just accept things. Where was the passion? Where was the fire? When was the last time he'd fought for me, really fought for me, instead of just quietly acquiescing to whatever I said? "Mummy," Sophie's voice drifted down from upstairs. "Why are you and Daddy talking so loud?" Eli and I exchanged glances. We hadn't been shouting, but kids had a way of sensing tension even when adults thought they were being subtle. "We're just talking about work, sweetheart," I called back. "Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine, and hadn't been for months. Not since I'd started spending my lunch breaks at Mark's coffee shop downtown, drawn initially by the excellent lattes, and gradually by something else entirely. Marc Danton was everything Eli wasn't. Spontaneous, artistic, passionate about his music and his dreams of making it big. When he looked at me, really looked at me, I felt like the woman I used to be before marriage and motherhood had worn away all my sharp edges. "I should check on Sophie's homework," Eli said, standing up from the table. As he passed behind my chair, he paused and gently squeezed my shoulder. "I love you, Cal. I hope you know that." "I love you too," I replied automatically, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. After he went upstairs, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. There was one from Mark sent an hour ago. "Coffee tomorrow. I've got a new song I want to play for you." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I should say no. I should delete his number and focus on fixing whatever was broken in my marriage. But instead, I typed back, "Can't wait to hear it. See you at noon." I was just putting my phone away when I heard Eli's mother's car in the driveway. Maureen had a key and a standing invitation to drop by whenever she wanted, something that had seemed sweet when Eli and I were newlyweds, but now felt like an invasion of privacy. "Hello, dear," Maureen said as she came through the front door, her sharp eyes immediately taking in the scene. She was one of those women who noticed everything: the unwashed dishes in the sink, the mail piling up on the counter, the tension lingering in the air like smoke. "Hi, Maureen. Eli's upstairs with Sophie." "And how are you doing, Calantha? You look tired." There was something in her tone that made me defensive. "I'm fine, just busy with work." She hung her coat on the rack by the door, with deliberate precision. "Eli mentioned you've been putting in long hours." "Someone has to," I said, immediately regretting how sharp it sounded. Maureen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't respond. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and began loading our dinner dishes into the dishwasher, a helpful gesture that somehow felt like criticism. "I can do that," I said. "It's no trouble. I like to keep busy." She paused, holding a plate under the running water. "You know, Eli's been worried about you lately." "Worried about what?" "He thinks you might be unhappy. In the marriage, I mean." The directness of it caught me off guard. Did he say that? Not in so many words, but a mother knows when her son is hurting. She turned off the water and faced me fully. "Is there something you want to talk about, dear?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. About the loneliness, about feeling trapped in a life that had somehow become too small for me, about Mark and the way he made me feel alive again. But Maureen's loyalty would always be to Eli first, and I wasn't naive enough to think she'd be on my side if she knew the truth. "Everything's fine," I said firmly. "Eli worries too much. Perhaps he sees something you don't." She started the dishwasher and wiped her hands on a towel. "Marriage is work, Calantha, but it's work worth doing, especially when there's a child involved." Before I could respond, Eli came back downstairs with Sophie in tow. "Mum, I didn't hear you come in." "Just arrived. I brought some cookies for Sophie." She pulled a container from her purse and handed it to her granddaughter, who squealed with delight. "Can I have one now, Daddy?" "One," Eli said, smiling for the first time all evening. "But then it's bath time." As Sophie munched happily on her cookie, Maureen gathered her things to leave. "I'll see you all this weekend for Paul's birthday dinner," she said, referring to Eli's older brother. "Looking forward to it," I lied. After she left, I went upstairs to help with Sophie's bedtime routine. As I was tucking her in, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that were so much like her father's. "Mommy, are you sad?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. "Why would you think I'm sad, baby?" "You don't smile as much as you used to, and you and Daddy don't laugh together anymore." I kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Sometimes grown-ups go through hard times, but that doesn't mean we don't love each other. Or you." "Okay." She seemed satisfied with that answer, but I could see her thinking it over as I turned off her light. Later that night, as Eli and I got ready for bed, I caught him watching me in the bathroom mirror as I brushed my teeth. "What?" I asked around a mouthful of toothpaste. "Nothing. Just, I miss you, I guess." "I'm right here." "Are you?" The question hung between us as we finished our nighttime routines in silence. When we finally got into bed, Eli reached for me, and I let him hold me, though my mind was already drifting to tomorrow's coffee date with Mark. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning and Eli was shaking me gently awake. "Cal, have you seen my phone charger? I think I left it in your coat pocket yesterday." I was instantly alert, though I tried to appear groggy. "What?" "No, why would it be there?" "I thought I remembered putting it there when we went to Sophie's school play." "Your black coat?" My heart started pounding. Yesterday, after meeting Mark, I'd gotten coffee to go, and the receipt was still in that pocket. "I'll look for it later. I'm sure it's around somewhere." But Eli was already walking toward the closet where I'd hung the coat. It'll just take a second. Eli, I said I'll look for it later. My voice came out sharper than intended. He stopped and turned to look at me, confusion clear on his face. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to. It's fine, I'm just tired. I forced a smile. I'll find your charger after I get some coffee in me. But as he left for work that morning, I saw him glance once more toward the closet, and I knew I was running out of time. My office was a small, cramped space in a converted warehouse downtown. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. As an administrative coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company, I spent most of my days managing schedules, filing reports, and answering emails that could have been handled by anyone with basic computer skills. It wasn't the career I'd dreamed of in college, but it was stable, and stability had seemed important when Sophie was born. Now, sitting at my desk at 10 in the morning, I found myself counting down the hours until my lunch break. Mark had texted me earlier with a photo of a new pastry he was trying out at the cafe, and the thought of seeing him was the only thing getting me through another mundane Tuesday. My phone buzzed with a text from Eli. Hey, quick question about tonight. Are you working late again? I stared at the message, irritation flaring in my chest. Here we go again with the questions. I typed back, probably. Big project due tomorrow. The response came immediately. What project? What project? I scrambled to think of something plausible. Johnson account reconciliation. Very boring, very time-consuming. Got it. I'll pick up Sophie from school and handle dinner. Thanks. I put my phone away, but 5 minutes later it buzzed again. This time it was Mark. Looking forward to seeing you later. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. A warm feeling spread through my chest as I remembered sitting across from him in the cozy corner booth of his cafe, talking about everything and nothing while he played with the silver rings on his fingers. Mark had this way of listening that made me feel like every word I said was important, like I was the most fascinating person in the world. Me too, I texted back. Can't wait. The morning dragged by in a haze of spreadsheets and phone calls. Around 11:30, my coworker Janet stopped by my desk. Hey, you want to grab lunch today? There's that new sandwich place on 5th Street. Can't today. I have an appointment. Janet raised an eyebrow. Doctor? Something like that. I could feel her curiosity, but I kept my eyes on my computer screen until she walked away. The last thing I needed was office gossip about my personal life. At 11:45, I gathered my purse and coat, telling my supervisor I was taking a long lunch to run errands. The cafe was only a 10-minute walk from my office, but I found myself hurrying, eager to escape the suffocating routine of my workday. Mark's place was called The Daily Grind, a name that would have been cheesy anywhere else but somehow worked in the eclectic downtown arts district. The walls were covered with local artwork. Mismatched furniture created cozy conversation nooks, and there was always music playing, sometimes live, when Mark felt inspired to pick up his guitar. He was behind the counter when I walked in, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he worked the espresso machine. When he looked up and saw me, his whole face lit up with that crooked smile that made my stomach flutter. There's my favorite customer, he said, loud enough that the other patrons could hear. But then, quieter, just for me. You look beautiful today. I felt myself blushing like a teenager. Just the usual, thanks. One large vanilla latte with an extra shot, coming right up. While he made my drink, I found our usual table in the corner and pulled out my phone to check messages. There was another text from Eli. By the way, I checked our shared calendar, and you don't have any meetings scheduled for today. Just wanted to make sure you didn't forget to update it. My blood ran cold. Eli was methodical about everything, including our shared Google Calendar, where we tracked work schedules, Sophie's activities, and social commitments. I'd been so focused on covering my tracks with verbal lies that I'd completely forgotten about the digital trail. I quickly opened the calendar app and added a fake meeting. Johnson account review, 2:05 hours p.m. Everything okay? Mark appeared at my table with my latte and his own cup of black coffee. Just work stuff, you know how it is. He slid into the seat across from me, and I noticed he was wearing a new t-shirt with his band's logo on it. Actually, I don't know how it is. That's one of the perks of being your own boss. He gestured around the cafe. No one to answer to but myself. It was exactly the kind of comment that would have annoyed me coming from anyone else. This casual dismissal of the responsibilities that came with a traditional job, a mortgage, a family. But from Mark, it sounded like freedom. Must be nice, I said, and meant it. It has its moments. He leaned forward, his fingers nearly touching mine on the small table. Speaking of which, we're playing at the Blue Moon this Friday night. You should come. I don't know if I can. Family obligations. Right, the husband. There was something in his tone that made me look up sharply. What about him? Nothing. It's just, you never talk about him. Not really. This was dangerous territory. In all our conversations over the past 2 months, I'd been careful to keep things vague about my home life. Mark knew I was married, knew I had a daughter, but I'd deliberately avoided details that might make my situation feel too real. There's not much to say. I searched for the right words. We're in different places right now. Different places how? He's very focused on security, stability, doing the right thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing into this perfect little suburban life that he's built for us. Mark nodded sympathetically. That sounds suffocating. It is. The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended. I love Sophie more than anything, but sometimes I look around and wonder how I ended up in this life. When did I become the kind of person who gets excited about new kitchen appliances and parent-teacher conferences? You're not that person, Mark said firmly. That's just a role you're playing. The real you is sitting right here. His hand moved across the table to cover mine, and I felt that familiar electric jolt of connection. This was what I'd been missing with Eli, this sense of being truly seen, truly understood. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a text, and Eli's name flashed on the screen. I should take this, I said reluctantly. Hey, I answered, trying to sound casual. Hi, sorry to bother you at work, but Sophie forgot her permission slip for the field trip tomorrow. I was going to drop it off at school, but I'm stuck in a client meeting. Could you swing by and take care of it? I glanced at Mark, who was listening with obvious curiosity. Actually, I'm not at the office right now. I'm at a working lunch. Oh, where? Just a restaurant downtown, with a client. Which client? The questions were coming too fast, and I could feel Mark watching me with growing interest. Eli, I really can't talk about this right now. I'm in the middle of a business discussion. There was a pause. Okay, sorry, I'll figure something else out. Thanks, I'll see you tonight. I hung up and immediately felt guilty about the hurt I'd heard in his voice. But the guilt was quickly replaced by irritation. Why did he have to call in the middle of my lunch break? Why couldn't he handle one simple school errand without involving me? Trouble in paradise? Mark asked with a wry smile. He's just very dependent. Can't make a decision without checking with me first. Sounds like he doesn't trust you to handle your own life. That's exactly it. I seized on the interpretation gratefully. He treats me like I'm some kind of fragile thing that needs to be managed and protected. It's infantilizing. Mark shook his head. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who sees you as an equal partner, not a responsibility to be managed. The validation felt like a drug. This was what I'd been craving. Someone who understood that I was capable of making my own choices. Someone who didn't try to control every aspect of my life. We spent the next hour talking about music, art, dreams deferred, and dreams still worth pursuing. Mark told me about his band's plans to record an EP, about the small venues where they'd been playing, about his hope of eventually making music his full-time career. I found myself sharing things I hadn't talked about in years. My college poetry, my old dream of traveling through Europe, the person I'd been before marriage and motherhood had reshaped me into someone more practical and less adventurous. "You should come to our show Friday," Mark said again as we prepared to leave. "I mean it. You need to remember what it feels like to be spontaneous." "I'll try," I said, though I already knew I wouldn't. Friday nights were family time, and disappearing for several hours would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. As I walked back to my office, my phone rang again. This time it was my sister Jenna. "Hey stranger, how are things?" "Fine, just busy with work." "I was thinking about coming up for a visit next weekend. It's been too long since I've seen Sophie." Jenna lived about 2 hours away and worked as a freelance graphic designer. At 29, she was still single and seemed to view my settled family life with a mixture of envy and bewilderment. "That sounds great. I'm sure Sophie would love to see you." "And how are things with you and Eli? You sounded stressed the last time we talked." I hesitated. Jenna and I had always been close, and part of me wanted to confide in her about everything. But I also knew my sister well enough to predict her reaction. She'd be shocked, probably judgmental, and definitely wouldn't understand the complexity of my situation. "We're fine. Just the usual married couple stuff." "Okay, well, if you ever need to talk..." "I know. Thanks." Back at my office, I tried to focus on actual work, but my mind kept drifting back to my conversation with Mark. He was right. I did deserve better. I deserved to be with someone who appreciated my intelligence, my creativity, my potential. Someone who saw me as more than just a wife and mother. At 4:30, I got another text from Eli. "How's the project going?" "Good. Should be done by 6. "Great. I'll keep dinner warm for you." The sweetness of the message should have made me feel guilty, but instead it just reinforced everything Mark had said about Eli treating me like a responsibility. He was keeping dinner warm for me, like I was a child who needed to be taken care of. I stayed at the office until 6:15, actually working on some legitimate projects, so I wouldn't feel like a complete liar. When I finally got home, Eli and Sophie were in the living room playing a board game. "Mommy!" Sophie jumped up and ran to hug me. "Daddy made spaghetti." "That sounds wonderful, baby." Eli looked up from the game board with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How was your day?" "Long, but productive." "Good. I'm glad the Johnson project worked out." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely, but his expression was neutral. "Yeah, it was fine. Just tedious." Over dinner, Sophie chatted about her day at school, while Eli and I made polite conversation about work and weekend plans. It all felt so normal, so perfectly domestic, and yet I found myself thinking about Mark's laugh, about the way he'd looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. After Sophie went to bed, Eli and I settled on the couch to watch TV. He put his arm around me, and I leaned into him out of habit, but my mind was elsewhere. "Cal," he said during a commercial break, "are we okay?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean us, our marriage. Lately it feels like we're just going through the motions." I turned to look at him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. This was my chance to be honest, to tell him about the loneliness and disconnection I'd been feeling, to work together on fixing whatever had gone wrong between us. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I think you're overthinking things. We're fine." "Are we? Because sometimes I feel like you're somewhere else entirely." "That's ridiculous. Where else would I be?" "I don't know. That's what worries me." I pulled away from his embrace, suddenly feeling claustrophobic. "Eli, you're being paranoid. I'm here, I'm present, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to want to be here." The simple honesty of it hit me like a slap, because he was right. I didn't want to be here. I wanted to be somewhere else, someone else, living a different life entirely. "I'm going to bed," I said, standing up abruptly. "It's been a long day." As I brushed my teeth that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked the same as always, but something in my eyes was different. There was a secretiveness there, a distance that hadn't been there 6 months ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Thanks for lunch today. You made my whole week brighter." I smiled, typing back, "Mine too." "Sweet dreams, beautiful." I deleted the message thread before getting into bed, but I fell asleep thinking about Friday night's show and wondering if I was brave enough to find a way to be there. Friday evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made me restless. Sophie was at a sleepover at her friend Emma's house, and Eli had suggested we use the rare child-free evening to have dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Under normal circumstances, I would have been excited about the prospect of uninterrupted adult conversation and a meal that didn't involve chicken nuggets. Instead, I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, thinking about Mark's band playing at the Blue Moon across town. "You seem distracted," Eli said, as we waited for our appetizers. The restaurant was busy, filled with couples and families enjoying their Friday night out, but I felt disconnected from the warm, convivial atmosphere. "Just tired. It's been a long week." "I know. You've been working so hard lately." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I was thinking maybe we could plan a weekend getaway soon. Just the two of us. My mom would love to watch Sophie." The suggestion should have pleased me, but instead it felt like another obligation, another expectation to manage. "That sounds nice. Maybe in a few weeks when things calm down at work." "Sure, no rush." But I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Our conversation continued in fits and starts throughout dinner, punctuated by long silences that felt increasingly uncomfortable. Eli tried to engage me with stories from his current project, questions about my work, plans for Sophie's upcoming birthday party. I responded with the appropriate words, but my mind kept wandering to what I was missing across town. By 9 o'clock, Mark's band would be taking the stage. I imagined him under the lights, his fingers moving across the guitar strings, his voice carrying over the crowd. He'd probably look for me in the audience, maybe even dedicate a song to someone special, the way musicians did in movies. "Cal, are you listening?" I snapped back to attention, realizing Eli had been talking, and I'd completely zoned out. "Sorry, what?" "I was asking about your sister's visit next weekend. Did you want to plan anything special?" "Oh, right, Jenna." I scrambled to remember what we'd discussed. "Maybe we could take Sophie to the zoo. She always likes that." "Good idea." Eli signaled for the check. "Should we head home?" "We could open a bottle of wine, watch a movie." The thought of spending the rest of the evening on our couch, pretending to be content with our quiet domestic life, made me feel trapped. "Actually, I have a headache. I think I just want to go to bed early." If Eli was disappointed by my lack of enthusiasm for his romantic evening plans, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and helped me with my coat, ever the considerate husband. The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed Paul's car parked across the street. Eli's older brother lived about 20 minutes away and rarely came by unannounced. "I wonder what Paul's doing here," Eli said, echoing my thoughts. We found Paul sitting on our front porch, checking something on his phone. At 38, he was a successful contractor with strong opinions about most things and little patience for what he considered weakness or indecision. He'd never particularly warmed to me, though he was always polite enough in front of Eli. "There you are," Paul said, standing up as we approached. "I was starting to think you'd run off to Vegas or something." "What's going on?" Eli asked, unlocking the front door. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. But since you weren't home, I figured I'd wait a few minutes." We went inside, and I immediately excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. Something about Paul's unexpected visit felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was bothering me. When I returned to the living room, I found the brothers sitting across from each other, their conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. "So," Paul said, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "How was dinner?" "Fine. Nice to get out." I sat down next to Eli on the couch, suddenly feeling like I was being interviewed. "Where did you go?" "Antonio's. The Italian place on Market Street." Paul nodded slowly. "Good choice. I was actually downtown myself today. Had a meeting with a potential client about a restaurant renovation." "Oh? Which restaurant?" "Place called the Blue Moon. You know it?" My heart stopped. The Blue Moon was where Mark's band was playing tonight, where I'd been desperately wanting to be instead of sitting through dinner with my husband. But there was no way Paul could know that. It had to be a coincidence. "I don't think so," I said carefully. "Is it new?" "Been around for a few years, apparently. Live music venue, kind of artsy crowd." Paul's eyes never left my face. "Funny thing, though. While I was there this afternoon, I could have sworn I saw you." The room went completely silent. I could feel Eli's attention sharpen, could practically hear him processing this information. "That's impossible," I said, forcing a laugh. "I was at work all day." "Huh. Must have been someone who looked just like you then. She was sitting with some guy, looked pretty cozy. Dark hair, about your height, same laugh." I felt like I was drowning, struggling to find solid ground. "Well, it wasn't me. My mistake then." Paul smiled, but there was no warmth in it. These days, everyone looks like someone else. Eli was staring at me now, and I could see the questions forming in his mind. "You said you were at work today. Did you go out for lunch?" "Just grabbed a sandwich at my desk. Very boring day, actually." But even as I said it, I realized Paul hadn't mentioned anything about lunch. He'd said afternoon, which could mean any time between noon and 5. And the Blue Moon? Why would he bring up that specific venue unless he knew something? "Paul," Eli said slowly, "what time was this? When you thought you saw Cal?" "Oh, around 1:30, 2 o'clock maybe, right around lunchtime." The trap was closing around me, and I could feel panic rising in my chest. "Like I said, it wasn't me. I don't even know where this Blue Moon place is." "It's downtown," Paul said helpfully. "In the Arts District. Near that coffee shop, what's it called? The Daily Grind." The mention of Mark's cafe felt like a physical blow. There was no way this was coincidental. Paul knew something, had seen something, and he was playing with me like a cat with a mouse. "I should probably get going," Paul said, standing up. "Early day tomorrow." He looked at me one more time. "Nice seeing you, Calantha. We should all get together more often." After he left, Eli and I sat in silence for several long minutes. I could feel him thinking, processing, trying to make sense of what his brother had implied. "Cal," he said finally, his voice very quiet, "is there something you want to tell me?" This was it, my chance to come clean, to explain everything before the lies got any deeper. I could tell him about the loneliness, about Mark, about feeling trapped in a life that no longer fit. Maybe we could work through it together. Maybe we could find a way back to each other. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Paul is mistaken. I don't know what he thinks he saw, but it wasn't me." He seemed pretty certain. "Well, he's wrong." I stood up, needing to move, to escape the weight of Eli's stare. "I don't appreciate being accused of lying about where I was." "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just trying to understand." "Understand what? That your brother saw someone who looked like me and decided to come over here and cause trouble? What is this, high school?" I was getting louder, more defensive, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. Attack felt safer than retreat. Why would Paul want to cause trouble? "I don't know. Maybe he's never liked me and this is his chance to stir up problems in our marriage." Eli shook his head. "That's not fair. Paul wouldn't do that." "Wouldn't he? He's never exactly been my biggest fan." "Cal, please, just talk to me. If something's going on..." Nothing is going on. The words exploded out of me. I am so tired of being treated like some kind of suspect in my own home. First you're questioning my work schedule, now your brother is following me around town, and you're both acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Nobody's following you around. Then how did Paul know exactly where to find me? How did he know about the blue moon and the daily grind? As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized my mistake. I'd just admitted to knowing about both places, despite claiming ignorance moments before. Eli caught it immediately. I thought you said you didn't know where the blue moon was. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of the hole I'd dug. I Googled it while Paul was talking, to see if I recognized it. You Googled it? Yes, on my phone, while you two were talking. But Eli was already shaking his head. Cal, your phone never left your purse. I was watching you the whole time. Caught in an obvious lie, I felt my carefully constructed defenses crumbling. Fine. Maybe I have heard of those places. That doesn't mean I was there today. Then how do you know about them? I don't know. Maybe someone at work mentioned them. Maybe I saw them online. Does it matter? It matters because you're lying to me. Eli's voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath now. You're lying about something, and I don't understand why. I'm not lying about anything important. What does that mean? There are unimportant lies and important lies. I felt cornered, desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. Everyone tells little white lies, Eli. It doesn't mean anything. Little white lies about what? About where I go for lunch, about whether I recognize the name of some restaurant, stupid, meaningless things that aren't worth fighting about. But we are fighting about them, because you keep changing your story every time I ask a question. He was right, and we both knew it. I was making everything worse with each attempt to explain myself, tangling the truth until it was unrecognizable. I think, Eli said carefully, that we should table this conversation for tonight. We're both tired, and I don't want to say something I'll regret. It was such a typical Eli response, measured, reasonable, designed to avoid conflict. A few months ago, I would have been grateful for his restraint. Now it just felt like another example of his refusal to fight for our marriage. Fine, I said. I'm going to bed. Cal, wait. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to him. I love you, he said simply. Whatever is going on, we can work through it. But I need you to be honest with me. The sincerity in his voice almost broke me. For a moment, I considered going back to him, sitting down, and telling him everything. But the moment passed, and instead, I just nodded and went upstairs. In our bedroom, I changed into my pajamas and got into bed, but sleep was impossible. My mind kept replaying the evening, trying to figure out how Paul had known where to find me, what he might have seen, how much Eli suspected. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Amazing show tonight. Wish you could have been there. The crowd was incredible. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Then I turned off my phone and pulled the covers over my head, trying to block out the growing certainty that my carefully managed double life was beginning to collapse. Downstairs, I could hear Eli moving around, probably unable to sleep either. Part of me wanted to go to him, to find a way to bridge the distance that seemed to be growing between us every day. But I stayed in bed, alone with my secrets, and waited for morning. Paul's birthday dinner was held at Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant that Maureen had chosen because it was sophisticated enough for a proper celebration. The entire Greaves family was there, Eli and me, Sophie, Maureen, Paul, and his wife Linda, and their 2 teenage sons. What should have been a pleasant family gathering felt more like a tribunal, with me as the unwilling defendant. I'd spent the afternoon getting ready, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a navy blue dress that I hoped struck the right balance between festive and conservative. Sophie wore her favorite pink dress with sparkly shoes, chattering excitedly about seeing her cousins and getting to stay up past her usual bedtime. You look beautiful, Eli said as we got ready to leave. but there was a distance in his voice that hadn't been there before Friday night's confrontation. We'd spent the weekend being carefully polite to each other, discussing logistics and schedules, while avoiding any mention of Paul's unexpected visit or the questions it had raised. The restaurant was busy, filled with the warm sounds of conversation and clinking glasses. Our table was in a semi-private alcove that allowed for family conversation without disturbing other diners. I found myself seated directly across from Paul, who greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Calantha, you look lovely tonight," he said as we settled into our seats. "Thank you. Happy birthday." 38 and counting. Time flies. He accepted a glass of wine from the server and raised it in a mock toast. "Here's to another year of wisdom and experience." The first part of dinner proceeded normally enough. Sophie entertained everyone with stories from school. Paul's sons talked about their soccer season, and Linda shared updates about her job at the local library. I participated when spoken to directly, but otherwise tried to keep a low profile. It was during the main course that things started to go sideways. "So, Calantha," Paul said, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision, "Eli tells me you've been working a lot of overtime lately." I felt Eli tense beside me. We hadn't discussed whether he'd mentioned anything to his family about our recent tensions, and I wasn't sure how much Paul knew or suspected. "The usual end-of-quarter crunch," I replied carefully. "Nothing too exciting." "What kind of projects are you working on?" Linda asked with genuine interest. "Oh, mostly account reconciliations, quarterly reports, that sort of thing. Very boring administrative stuff." "I'm sure it's more complicated than you make it sound," Maureen said diplomatically. But I caught the slight emphasis on the word complicated and wondered if it was intentional. "Actually," Paul continued, "I've been spending some time downtown myself lately. Business has been picking up in that area. Lots of young professionals, artists, that crowd." Here it comes, I thought, gripping my fork a little tighter. "There's this whole arts district that's really taken off. Coffee shops, galleries, music venues. Very bohemian." His eyes met mine across the table. "Do you ever get down that way for work?" "Not really. My office is pretty far from the arts district." "Right, of course. Different part of downtown entirely." Paul took a sip of wine. "Though I suppose you might go there for lunch sometimes, change of scenery and all that." Eli was looking between his brother and me now, clearly sensing the undercurrent of tension, but not sure what to make of it. "I usually just eat at my desk," I said. "More efficient." Sure. Though everyone needs a break sometimes, right? I know when I'm working on a big project, I like to get out, clear my head, maybe grab coffee somewhere with a little atmosphere." Dinner with Eli's family felt less like a celebration and more like an interrogation disguised as small talk. Paul kept circling the subject of creative people downtown and a certain artsy coffee shop, clearly alluding to Mark while pretending innocence. Every question was a trap. Did I feel fulfilled? Was I missing something? Did I ever wish for a different life? When my phone buzzed with a message from Mark, "Thinking about you," I glanced at it for half a second, and Paul caught everything. The look, the tiny smile, the lie I blurted about a colleague from work. He pushed harder, philosophizing loudly about people never being truly present and always wanting to be somewhere else, and I knew then that he suspected far more than he was saying. Outside the restaurant, he pulled me aside, all friendly concern on the surface and warning underneath. Eli was a good man, he said. He deserved someone all in. On the drive home, Eli finally voiced what had been building for months. Paul seemed to know something, and he felt like he was losing me without understanding why. In the bathroom that night, he asked the one question that could have changed everything. "Are you having an affair?" I had a chance to tell the truth and cut the wire before it blew up our life. Instead, I lied straight to his face, blamed his paranoia, and watched the last of his trust drain away. We went to bed with our backs turned, the room full of everything I refused to admit, and I told myself I could still juggle it all. I had no idea that, from that night on, it was only a matter of time before everything crashed.